Dear respected elders, honored guests, and dear brothers and sisters, Jai Sai Ram. So happy and honored to be with all of you. So let me see if I can get this technology going here. Nilesh told me what to do. Let's see if it... I hit the pause button. I may not be doing something right. Aha. Okay, thank you. So today, we're going to focus on Swami's teachings on communication so that when we leave the room, we all are improved communicators with our family, friends, colleagues, and loved ones. So how are we going to do this? If I can get the clicker going. Okay. So, how are we going to do this? There's basically a couple ways we're going to focus on. Next slide. The common theme that's going to go through this time together is to remember who we're speaking to. And if we remember who we're speaking to, which is none other than our dearest Swami, we're automatically going to be on good behavior and we're going to be a much better communicator. And that's really the key, I believe, to our good communication and loving communication. And then we're also going to go over some of Swami's teachings that he's spoken of so often, such as first understanding, then adjustment. We can't always oblige. We can always speak obligingly. Next slide. So, why is communication important? Well, there's a number of reasons, and I'm going to just touch on a few. Number one, each one of us in this room has a unique role to play in Swami's mission. Swami has said that none of us can come to him unless he calls us personally. So the way we communicate is going to play a major, major role in how well we play our role in Swami's mission. The other thing is that communication is really a major determinant of our own spiritual transformation, because Swami has said many times that how do we know if we're making spiritual progress? One of the ways is our thoughts, words, and deeds in unison, and is it all based on love? And so our communication is our thoughts and our words, and all that is based on our thoughts. So communication is key. And I'd like to ask a question of all of you. What is the most powerful communication technique that we can use that tells people who we are and what we think is important? Anyone? What's that? Love, yes. And how we put that into action. And that's why Swami is such a role model for all of us, because he has shown by his actions what he believes in, and that's how he's taught us, by his actions. Next slide. So, how does Swami inspire millions around the world to provide free medical care? He did that by building hospitals where they provide loving and compassionate care. And he also went to those hospitals on many occasions and showed what it looks like to give patients loving and compassionate care. And also, with the Sathya Sai schools, Swami could have just said value-based education is very important. However, he did much more than that. He built schools that gave this value-based education. And this is something Professor Venkataraman touched on yesterday when he was teaching at Caltech. And he said that one of the amazing things that Swami has done is he's one of the few people on this planet who has combined both the educational aspect with compassion and blended those two pillars of knowledge on one hand and compassion on the other. And the end result is Swami has turned out so many students that spread his light and love all over the world and are basically messengers of his love. And Swami has said that, what is the end of education? Character, right. And all the people who have graduated from his schools are young men and women of the highest character and who are using their knowledge and skills to serve society. And the drinking water projects, Swami has said that there's many things that are basic human needs that everyone should have available. One of them is medical care, and he's shown that with his schools. The other is high-quality, value-based education, and basic necessities such as drinking water. Swami has provided drinking water projects that have provided free and pure drinking water to over 12 million people in southern India. So he's shown by his actions what's really important. Next slide. So leading by example. Swami's basic teachings are love all, serve all. And how do we do that? It's by our thoughts, words, and our deeds. And that's basically how we communicate with people. And during this workshop, we're also going to talk about the other teachings and go into a little bit more depth about the first understanding, then adjustment. Swami has said most of the time when we try and put that practice in first understanding, then adjustment, we try and put that into practice, we get it opposite. We try and do the adjustment before we've really understood the other person. And then the value of a smile. I hear that even the speakers had something up here to prompt for the smile. And Swami has shown us the value of that. I'll go into that in a little more detail. And then, whether we like it or not, communication by email is one of the things that is just part of our lives now. And so what does good communication look like when we're doing email with each other? And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about how to handle conflict and make an apology. Next slide. Okay. The power of communication. This is a beautiful quote of one of Swami's contemporaries that I'd like to share with you that shows how powerful and long-lasting our communication is. I've learned that people have said, actually, it'll probably be easy for me to just do the whole thing rather than tell you when to do the slides. I learned that people will forget what you've said, people will forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. And I'm going to give you an example of how true that is. This was by Maya Angelou. Swami has also said this in many ways. He said that if we do something where we hurt someone physically, they'll probably heal in a few months. But if we say an unkind word that hurts their heart, that can fester for life. So it goes both ways. Now let me tell you an example of a positive thing that lasted a long time. About 40 years ago, I was a young man in pre-med, and I knew I wanted to go into medicine. I didn't know if I'd get into medical school, and I was looking for good role models. And I can remember going in to see a doctor when I was going to the University of Michigan, where both Alan and I went. And I can't remember all the details of this visit. However, I can remember clearly and distinctly how she made me feel. When this doctor walked into the room, she had a beautiful smile on her face. And I can remember she just made me feel good. She actually seemed happy to see me. I thought, wow, I'm nobody special, and here this doctor is really glad to meet me. And it was late in the afternoon, and this body, even as a young man, was feeling kind of tired. But this lady was just bouncing into the room. They had all this positive energy, and I thought, wow, this is incredible. And she just made me feel so comfortable. At the end of that visit, I was thinking to myself, I don't know if I'm going to get into medicine. I hope, by God's grace, I become a doctor someday. And if I ever do, I want to be just like her. I want to be able to come into the room and give a beautiful smile and make my patient feel so comfortable just like she did. So she was one of my role models as I was growing up, and that shows the power of communication. People will never forget the way you make them feel. Next slide. Now, one of the most important aspects of communication is a loving smile, and this is Swami, and that's a smile that could melt anyone's heart. And so, basically, the power of a smile that's one of the most powerful forms of communication that we can do. And Swami has told doctors, when you go into a room, you should first smile and give patients a capsule of love, because that will speed their healing and help their progress. And that is true for every single profession, no matter what the profession is. Nothing better than a warm greeting. And it doesn't matter what the language is. It's a universal language. Anyone can understand it, whether they speak your language or not. When we go to the grocery store or when we go to the gas station, we can always greet someone with a nice, warm smile. Now, I know there's a number of young adults here, or former young adults, and during the Third World Youth Conference, Swami said something really powerful about smiling. I want to see how many of you might remember it. He said, when we smile, something happens. We can go advance the slides. Yeah, just right there. When we smile, what happens? Anyone know? Yes, what, on the lady's side? That is also true. What you both said is true. Swami also said at the time that love bubbles up in us. That's exactly what he said. Love bubbles up in us. And what you said is true also. Light bubbles up, good vibrations. So, next slide. So yes, love bubbles up in us, and it's a great way to make a heart-to-heart connection, easy way to connect with people. And the best way to make that heart-to-heart connection is to remember each and every person is our dearest Swami. Okay, next slide. Now, this is something Dr. Reddy talked about also, and is equally important as it is that we have loving speech. We should also make sure that there's moderation in our speech, and we just don't blab or be a chatterbox just for the sake of talking. So we should actually think before we speak. And so when I was at the silent retreat, someone actually told me a way to give Swami's teachings the way Dr. Reddy did and use think as a mnemonic. So next slide. So think about the letters. Before we speak, the T, is it true? H, will it hurt anyone? I, will it improve on silence? N, is it necessary? And K, is it kind? That's really important because as Swami said, we should always help, ever, hurt, never. And Swami says if we can't help someone, at least don't hurt them. So we don't want to say something unkind. Next slide. The scriptures have said, and Swami has also said many times, speak the truth in a pleasing way, and avoid speaking a truth that is unkind. Why? As Swami has said, that unkind word can fester in the heart of another for months and years. Next slide. Sometimes silence is golden. We don't always have to point out faults unless it's our duty and our obligation. Next slide. Now I'm just going to read this one quote to you because it's a pretty powerful quote. The bond of love and brotherliness will be stronger if people would speak less and speak sweetly. Silence, maunam, has been prescribed as a spiritual practice for the same reason. You are all aspirants at various stages of the road, and so this discipline is valuable for you also. And this is something Dr. Reddy spoke about also this morning. Next slide, please. Practice moderation in speech. It will help you in many ways. When the foot slips, the wound heals after a few months. When the tongue slips, the wound it causes in the heart of another will fester for life. Next slide. I just want to repeat this because this is so important. This goes along with when Swami says, help ever, hurt never, and remember the hurt never part. When the foot slips, the wound heals after a few months. When the tongue slips and we say an unkind word, that wound can fester for life. Next slide. Now, the tongue is also liable to 4 other errors that we should avoid strictly. Number 1, we should never utter falsehood, and we've already talked about the value of speaking the truth. Number 2, it tends to find faults with others. We're going to go into that in a little more depth in just a minute. Number 3, excessive articulation. We just spoke about moderation in speech. And number 4, indulging in scandals. I think we all know that's something to be avoided. So why do we need to do this? Swami says we need this for our own personal peace and also for peace in general for society. We have to avoid these 4 things. Next slide. So finding fault with others. First of all, Swami said when it comes to this and we notice that we're finding faults with others, we should remind ourselves of Swami's teachings. We should be looking for the good in others, not their faults. So Swami says, find the good in others and look for the faults in ourselves. He also said we should be lenient when we're judging another's actions, but we should be harsh when we're judging our own actions. And Swami also said another thing where when we're always focusing on faults of others, why it's dangerous for our own mind. Does anyone know what Swami also says about that? Or finding faults in others? Yes? Yes, that's beautiful. What she just said, thank you, is when we're pointing one finger, we should look. There's three coming right back at us. And Swami points out that's because the faults we see in others are frequently the faults that we have in ourselves. So the first thing is when we find faults in others, we would see, do I have that fault myself? And if we do, correct it. Because many times it's called projection. We have actually that fault in ourselves when we see it in others. Now the other thing is Swami said, even if we look and see, and we're pointing our finger, at least in our mind, and we don't have the fault in ourselves, if we keep on looking for faults in others, that fault will contaminate our mind and can eventually enter it, and then we'll have the fault. So really, finding faults in others, there's numerous reasons why we don't want to do that, and we want to instead look for the good in others. And actually, when we have purity in our hearts, that's what we're going to see in others, is the good in others. Next slide. So, let's go over this saying, first understanding, then adjustment. Swami has said most of the time we do just the opposite. Someone starts talking, we interrupt, and we start giving the adjustment before they've even had a chance to really say their piece. So we want to listen patiently. We want to listen for nonverbal clues, because really a good part of communication is actually nonverbal. What percentage do you think of communication is nonverbal? In other words, what I'm saying is part of my communication, and my tone of voice, my inflection, the way I'm moving is my body language. How much do you think body language accounts for? Like 10%, 50%? What do you think? I heard 90, 80? Yes. You know, I've read all kind of different things, but it probably ranges anywhere from 60 to 90%. It's a huge, huge part of our communication. So we want to listen for that. And, you know, if we're standing there like this, someone is talking to us, and we have our arms like this, and we're kind of leaning back, what kind of message is that giving the other person? So our body language is really, really important, and we need to pay attention to that when we're trying to understand someone. And again, the best way to make a good connection, listen to someone carefully so that we understand them, is to make that heart-to-heart connection. And if we remember it, Swami, it makes it really easy. Okay, next slide. Now, after the adjustment, what is our response? Many of us are really good problem solvers. Regardless of the profession, we know how to solve problems. So when someone tells us about a problem, the first thing we do is we tell them what to do. We give them advice. And sometimes that's what they want. Oftentimes it's not. They just want someone that, hears them out. So really, sometimes all people want is for us to demonstrate empathy. Really, I'm sorry to hear that, Ellen. That sounds really tough. That's all most people want. Maybe it's a change in my behavior. Maybe Jaime is noticing a fault in myself, and I need to, stop doing it. Or maybe I'm talking to someone, Hyman, and he's talking to me. I really don't understand him, and so I just need to ask him a few more questions. Maybe that's the first part before I go into the adjustment, so I have to really talk a little bit more before I understand them. And finally, maybe we need to offer help, and we can ask them, do you want help, Hyman? I'm sorry to hear that. Do you want some help? And Hyman might say, no, not really. I just, I feel better now that I've got it off my chest. Next slide. Okay, so now we're going to go over a situation. This situation is, I think, really common, and I want to see how many of you can relate to this. This could be a situation at the office where there's a meeting where you're all having a brainstorming session, or it could be actually at a Sai Center. All of you are sitting around, and, one person is talking about Swami's teaching, and, you're waiting for your turn, okay? So this person is speaking, and he thinks his colleagues are listening. Next slide. But this guy is really not paying attention. He's just thinking, I can hardly wait until it's my turn to speak, and he's just kind of going over what he's going to say. And then, next slide, the other guy is saying, as soon as he pauses for just a second, then I'm going to speak, as soon as he takes a breath. So oftentimes, people are just thinking about what they're going to say. They're not really listening to the person. They're not really fully present. And how many have been guilty of that? I know I've certainly been guilty of that. So that's something we really have to watch. When someone is talking, let's just be present in the moment and listen. If Rini is talking, then I need to just focus on what Rini is saying. And Swami will, help me remember what I wanted to say, but I need to listen to Rini for the time being. Okay, next slide. Okay, now, a husband and wife come home from work about the same time. And the wife is really upset, and so she starts talking to her husband about what a tough day it was. Next slide. And before she even gets half a sentence out, boom, her husband interrupts her and says, oh, don't worry about it, honey, everything's going to be okay. Next slide. So now she's thinking, why can't he just listen to my feelings? Next slide. Next thing you know, she starts crying. She's so upset he can't even listen to her. So how many of us have been guilty of that? And then the husband is thinking, next slide, now what did I do? Okay, now, the nice part about, by the way, both the husband and wife are Sai devotees, and they're really trying to practice Swami's teachings. He just didn't realize that, he needs to listen a little bit better. Now, the wife is really practicing one of Swami's teachings because 2 days later, she's completely forgot about the fact that her husband hurt her feelings and didn't listen to her, okay? So a lot of us worry about, I know I do, I worry about losing my memory as I get older. However, Swami says, don't worry. He says, there's 2 things that you should forget about immediately, whether you're young or old. And she just demonstrated one of them, which is, that's right, if someone hurts you, forgive and forget. And she's a great example of that. And what's the other thing Swami said that we should forget? What's that? Yes, exactly. From the ladies' side, I heard from several. We should forget the good that we've done for others. That's exactly right. And why should we forget about it? Why? Yes, a couple reasons. I think I heard the answer from the audience. It's a little hard without microphones. So what Swami said is there's 2 reasons to forget. Number one, it tends to pump up our ego if we remember the good we did for others, right? So we want to just forget about it. As a matter of fact, the way we should do seva is we do it for the sake of serving the divinity in that person and then just forget about it. That's number one. The other one is Swami said that if we remember the good that we've done, we might expect that other person to do the same thing for us and, help us in the future. And we should just forget about it. So for both of those reasons, Swami said, just forget about the good you've done for others and also forget about the harm others have done for you. Okay, next slide. So, same thing happens. The wife comes home again, and remember, the husband is a Sai devotee, so he's trying real hard, and he realizes he messed up a couple of days ago, and this time he says, I'm going to listen to my wife. I'm just going to wait until she finishes, okay? So he listens really patiently, and finally, after 3 or 4 minutes, she finishes getting off her chest all the tough things that happened at work, and her boss was so unfair to her and was rude to her, wasn't treating her right. Next slide. So now the husband says, yes, and now here's what you ought to do. Immediately starts giving her advice. Next slide. Honey, I only wanted you to listen to my problem, not solve my problem. The thing is, most people are really smart, and our wives or our husbands, they can figure out what to do with their boss, or, it's just that we think we need to give them advice all the time. Oftentimes, that's not the answer. Next slide. So, the art of listening well. We should put ourselves in the other person's shoes, and there's a lot of different ways to do that. I actually have the great honor of teaching this workshop to a lot of doctors at my medical center, and so naturally we frame it a little bit differently. So we tell them when you're trying to speak respectfully to another person, in this case a patient, you just picture someone that you really admire very much. And so, I don't know, is Janani Krishna Swami in the audience? I know she's a doctor from this region. Is she present today? Has anyone seen her? Okay, well, she's a young doctor, and I'll tell you a story about how she put this into practice. She was working at a hospital during her internship, and there was this one patient that everyone was afraid to take care of because nothing that any nurse or doctor could do would please her. She was always complaining. She was always unhappy. Nothing you could do would please her. So everyone just dreaded to go in there, including Janani. So Janani thought, I've got to practice Swami's teaching, so before I go in, I'm going to practice. She's my dear grandmother because I love her so much. I know that will change everything. So she went in, and she took care of this patient exactly as if she imagined her grandma was there. And the patient could feel something was different, and the patient was much different. She wasn't like a glowing, wonderful, loving person. However, she was easy to deal with that particular day. And at the end of the visit, the patient said something that no one had heard from her lips the entire time she'd been in the hospital. She said, "Doctor, thank you. Thank you. So it's just amazing the power of love, and that was just by her thoughts. She didn't say or do anything different than she would have otherwise. Now, the other thing for all of us, I find one of the most powerful ways is just to remember who we're talking to. Before we go in to see our patient, or before we go in to see our business associate, or our colleague, or our child, or our mother or father, just remember, that's Swami we have a chance to interact with. And automatically, it's going to change everything. Next slide. These are all the things that we need to do to make a heart-to-heart connection and be a good listener and practice Swami's teachings, first understanding, then adjustment. And if I asked all of you 2 months from now to remember everything that was on the slide, what are the things you need to do? None of us would remember. However, there's an easy way to do it. Very easy. All we have to do is remember that that person that we're speaking with is our dearest Swami. And automatically, we're going to be really focused. We're going to listen carefully. We know that we're talking to Swami, so we're not going to worry about the past or the future. We're going to be fully focused in the present. And we're going to be humble and respectful and everything else we need to be a good communicator. So just remembering that we're talking to Swami is the key. Next slide. So first understanding, then adjustment. Next slide. What is a technique to make sure that we've understood someone? Because sometimes, even if we imagine, we're not imagining, we remember the reality that we're talking with Swami, we still may not have understood them. So how do we know that we've understood them? What's a technique we can do to make sure we've actually understood? Any ideas? What's that? Yes, the repeat back technique or summarizing. That's exactly right. Hey guys, you're going to have to wake up. The ladies are getting all the answers. And they don't even wait. They're instantaneously they have the answer. So yes, the repeat back or summarize technique. Next slide. Yes, so you repeat back. And you repeat back not only what you've heard, but also what you felt. Because remember, a lot of communication is, nonverbal. And it sounds like, it feels like, it seems like you're unhappy about that, Hyman, and then I explain what I just have heard from you. And then Hyman will let me know if I'm right or if I'm wrong. Next slide. Oh, yes, this one saying, I love it. Nothing is so simple that it could not be misunderstood. And that is so true. How many times have all of us said something to someone and we thought it was really simple, really straightforward, and then by their action or when they repeated things back, they weren't even close. And the same thing happens when people talk to us and give us a really simple instruction, and I completely misunderstand it. It just happens. So we really have to be patient, and that really helps us remember we have to be very simple and straightforward with our instructions. Next slide, please. Now, after we've listened to another person, what's our next action? Next slide. When should we offer advice? Okay. There's a lot of different ways to do that. And most of the time, it's obvious if they want advice. However, if you're not sure, we can always ask. We can ask something like this: would you be interested in hearing what other people have done in this situation? I like the last line. There's many different ways to do it. If you're not sure if they really want advice, you can just say, let's say they've told you something really painful and difficult. You can say, I'm really sorry to hear that. Is there some way I can help? And that way you've given them the capsule of Swami's love, and then also you find out, and many times they'll say, no, I just wanted to tell you, thanks for listening. Or they'll say, yeah, actually, Harini, I'd like your advice. How do you think I would take care of this? And the person will tell you. Okay, next slide. How to give advice. We should keep it short and simple and be very patient because, next slide. Next slide. Swami has said, I've been teaching you all these good teachings all these years, and you're still not practicing. My God, Swami is the best communicator in the universe, and if Swami can't get us to follow simple advice, you can imagine how hard it's going to be for you and I. So that's all the more reason we have to be very patient and realize we have to repeat things a number of times. I have heard that with adult learning theory, people have to hear things 12 or 14 times, plus be motivated before they're going to change. So we really have to be patient when we're communicating. Next slide. Now, Praise in public and give constructive feedback in private. This is so, so important. And how many of you have heard the concept before of building up a relationship bank account? Okay, yes, everything in life is about relationships. So if you're a boss and it's your job to give back advice and give constructive criticism, and you haven't been praising or acknowledging your employees or your coworkers, what do you think the chances are that they're going to be open-minded and listen to you when you have some discussion with them for room for improvement? The chances are actually quite low. People estimate that you have to tell someone 3 or 4 compliments or praises before they will accept some constructive criticism. So I just say that to remind all of us that if we're in the position as a parent, as a SE teacher, as a supervisor at work, and I would say most of us are in multiple roles like that we really have to work on giving people praise and acknowledgement whenever we can so that they'll be more open to constructive criticism. Okay, so we need to build up a positive balance in our relationship bank account. Next slide. So how to give constructive criticism. Now, most people, they intuitively know that, hey, I should say something positive first, okay? And so they'll say something like, Gene, you're doing a great job in videotaping this thing, but, and then Gene says, oh, he didn't really mean that, and now he's going to say what he really wants to say. So the thing of it is, it's better to use a positive connector. I might say something like, Gene, I just saw one of your movies that was one of the most fantastic things I've seen. You've done such a great job. And I was wondering if next time you might add, and then I will talk about something else that maybe he could do to improve. Would that sound better to you? So leaving out the negative connector is helpful. Okay. Now, saying this, if I haven't built up my positive bank account with Haima by giving her some praise and acknowledgement if she was my employee, Haima is probably not going to listen to me. However, if I did have a positive bank account, then I have a better chance if I say something like, what I notice about you when you're at your best, and then I'll describe what Haima is doing when she's at her best, and then I'll say, what I notice about you when you're not at your best, there's a better chance that you would be open. How would that sound to you, Haima? A little bit better? Okay. Next slide. Now, how to accept or deal with criticism. Now, this is an important thing, and actually, Dr. Venkataraman got this question from the audience last Sunday when he was in our region talking. The question was this: how do we deal with criticism when it's completely false? I mean, I'm being accused of something that's completely false. How am I supposed to deal with it? So, Swami, fortunately, has given us some really clear answers on this. Number one, he said the first thing we have to do is evaluate, is it true or not? Okay, if Alan is criticizing me, first thing I have to do is be open. Is it true? And it's just like, what happens? How do we go from one grade to the next grade? We have to take a test, right? And in life, we get lots of tests, and criticism is one of those tests. So if Alan is criticizing me, and so that's a way to look at criticism that is untrue. Now, if it is true what Alan is saying, then we should be grateful because he's pointing out a fault that I need to improve on. And that we should take it as such and actually be thankful for that. So, next slide. So the two ways is, if the criticism is untrue, God is testing us, we want to pass the test. That's really helpful in facing the test. And remember the analogy about the nail in the wall or graduating to the next grade. And if the criticism is true, be thankful and work on improving. And I don't know about all of you, but I can tell you from my past history, When people are criticizing me, oftentimes they are correct, and it's something I need to improve. And that's the light that Swami wants us to work on. Okay, next slide. You cannot always oblige. We can always speak obligingly. Now, the first thing we should do is really try and find out what is the person trying to accomplish, because many times when they ask a specific question, we can't oblige, and so if we just gave a quick answer, it would be, no, I'm sorry, I can't do that. However, it's much better to find out what are they trying to accomplish, because if we find out what the person really wants, we might find a way we can help them. And it's always nice to add something positive at the end. For in other words, in saying, I can't do that, however, I can do this. That's a better way. However, what would be an even better way? Any ideas? What's that? Yes, that's also, actually, I like that answer because the answer was, I'll think about it. Because oftentimes people feel that they're backed into a corner, and so that's a great answer. Let me think about it, I'll get back with you. Next slide. Another thing is, if you're sure what your answer is, if you're not sure, your answer is perfect, sir. If you are sure, you can say, I really wish I could do that. What I can do is, so you, positive, positive. I really wish I could. This is what I can do. Next slide. Okay. Now, this is important because we've had some study circles I've done with young adults and with adults, and I think it's important to understand what this does not mean. Some people have told me, this is not practical. You can't do this in the real world. If you oblige, that means you're a yes man or a yes woman. There's no way you can work up the corporate ladder. And that could be that's very far from the truth. It doesn't mean, when you speak obligingly, it does not mean that you agree. It doesn't mean that you're going to comply. It does not mean that you're not going to hold your ground and stick up for what's right. It just means that you're going to speak obligingly. As a matter of fact, as one communication told me, he was taught at a very young age with his mother, there is always a nice way to say no. There is always a nice way to say no. We can't always oblige. We can always speak obligingly. Next slide. Now, Swami has also said, if you want others to respect you, we have to first show them respect. Okay? Now, one of the ways we show respect is by speaking obligingly, which we just spoke about, by listening carefully, and many other things. Okay? Matter of fact, Swami has said, okay, the man of the house is supposed to be respected by the wife and children, correct? Swami said no. He said if the husband doesn't respect the wife, and if the husband doesn't respect, or the father doesn't respect his children, they're not going to respect him. So even the wife and the children don't respect the father unless he treats them with respect. So that's very, very important. We have to treat others with respect if we want to be treated with respect. And one of the ways we can do that is by using positive connectors rather than negative connectors. So oftentimes, how many times have we been guilty about this? We're in a brainstorming session at home or at work or a study circle in the Sai organization. We're trying to figure out the best way to do things. And someone gives a good, what they think is a good idea, and then the other one says, let's say I'm talking with Alan, for example, and we're brainstorming about something on a dental camp or a medical camp, and I give what I think is a really good idea. And next thing, when I'm through talking, Alan says, yeah, that's a good idea, but it's kind of like, well, he didn't think that was a good idea. However, if Alan says, yeah, that's a good idea, and I was just thinking of another perspective, have you considered this? I would be much more open-minded to that. And I can tell you, when I've given this kind of workshop and people have given me feedback afterwards, they told me that when they are more mindful of the connectors and they use and more, especially in a brainstorming rather than but, it has made a huge difference in their relationship with people at work. You should give it a try. Don't take my word for it. It makes a big difference. Next slide. So avoid using but as a connector and use and. So when you give someone a compliment, let it stand. Give the compliment and then you can go to an opposing view if you have an opposing or a different view. Next slide. So yes and is a much more positive, much more respectful. Next slide. Now there's sometimes it's good to say yes but, and a good example of that was a Challenger disaster. At NASA they had a culture where people were actually really frightened of their superiors and they're afraid to speak up and say no. So in that situation, it would have been better to say yes, but because there were several people who actually knew that the part that failed might fail, but they were afraid to speak up. So that's what I love about Swami's teachings. They're so practical. He's always said, practical sense first, then spiritual sense. So if you need to stick up and say something at work to your superiors, you should definitely do that. However, in most cases, and I would say 99.9% of the time, it's much better to say yes and in most of our conversations with our family and our friends. Okay, what to do with a person who's angry or upset? Sometimes just being quiet is all that's needed and listening to them carefully. That sounds really upsetting, Satyam. Is there anything I can do to help? Heavy lunch, okay. Next slide. Okay, what to do when someone pushes your hot button? Okay, how many of you have hot buttons? Okay, at least some of you are admitting it. Okay, I'll just speak about myself, and I'll talk about one of my shortcomings. With Swami's help, I think I've worked on this hot button, and it's almost gone. Hot buttons are just a form of our ego, okay? And we all need to flatten our ego, and Swami is helping all of us to flatten our ego. So one of my hot buttons is this. When I grew up, my parents taught me to be on time for everything, okay? So when I would go to see a doctor, I would be there on time or early. So throughout my career, I couldn't understand why patients were constantly coming late. Okay? I didn't understand that. So one time, this happened about 9 or 10 years ago, a patient showed up 35 minutes late. Okay? And as soon as she got to the waiting room, she started ranting and raving, "I want to see Dr. Phaneuf right away." And she was causing such a ruckus in the waiting room that actually the nurse came and knocked on my door and says, "Dr. Phaneuf, you've got to do something. This lady's going crazy. She wants to see you immediately." And they told me what the situation was, and boom, not only was she hot, she set off my button. What? Hello? What? Why is she so upset when she got here 35 minutes late? So then I realized that she had pushed my hot button, and I thought, oh, this is not good, so I'm going to have to practice Swami's teaching. So I did. Took a deep breath. Then I told actually it was my medical assistant, not my nurse, I said, "Please tell Mrs. Smith that I'll be with her as soon as I can, but I'm with the patient right now." So I finished seeing the patient, and then when she came in, I sat down with her, and instead of grilling her why she was late, I says, "Mrs. Smith, I'm sorry to keep you waiting. How can I help you?" And this is what Mrs. Smith told me. She said, "Dr. Phaneuf, I'm so sorry that I made such a big deal out in the waiting room." She said, "I was just so frustrated." She said, "I drove to the Hayward office, which is the wrong office. You're at Union City, two miles down the road, and I had a hard time parking. By the time I got here, I was a half an hour late, and I have to pick up my young child in childcare, and I don't know, that really made me nervous and upset because I don't know what to do. You just have to be there on time." So she says, "Thank you for seeing me." And, most people have a good reason for being upset if we just practice Swami's teaching, first understanding, then adjustment. And you know something? Even if they didn't have a good reason for being late, so what? So what? We can still practice Swami's love, give them the capsule of love. It's okay. We all make mistakes. We're all late. Okay, next slide. Okay, so the approach to conflict. Now, this is something that's a little different situation. Now, picture yourself in your work at home. It doesn't matter what your profession is. This works in all professions. And this is a nice way to practice Swami's teachings. So this is a situation. The patient, it's an emotionally charged issue. The patient or the person wants something, and that's something you can't give them, okay? Or the something that they want is not something that's good for them, so you would not do it anyways, even though you might be able to do it. It's not good for them. And that happens a lot of times with our children or with other things. So that's the situation. So the best thing to do is to first get curious rather than furious, because sometimes the request is so outlandish, the first thing is they press our hot button. So practice understanding, get curious. So we listen to them carefully, and then we demonstrate empathy. Let's say that Satyam is really upset about something. I'm going to say to Satyam, "I'm so sorry to hear that, Satyam." I demonstrate empathy, and what is that? That's giving Satyam the capsule of love. And then I summarize, "Satyam, from what you've told me, you want to get so-and-so. So I'm summarizing. Now already Satyam is calming down because I'm talking softly and I'm just summarizing what he's upset about, and I'm showing that I'm actually listening to him by repeating back what he said. Now this is a really crucial step. The next thing I need to do is to validate what Satyam has said. Now a lot of people are resistant to the validation stage because they say, I'm not going to validate because I don't agree. Validation has nothing to do with agreeing. It has everything to do with respecting Satyam's opinion. So I could say something like, Satyam, I can see that you would like, from what you've told me, I can see why you want this. From what you've told me, it makes perfect sense. And then I have to be careful and do the bridge. And from my perspective, this is what I think might be the best thing. Would you be willing to would you be willing to consider this other possibility? So just going over the steps again, listening carefully, demonstrating empathy, which is giving people the capsule of love as often as possible, summarizing what the other person is saying to make sure you clearly understood, and then validating what they've said. From what you've told me, Satyam, I can see why you want X. Then carefully we do the bridge, and from my perspective, this is what I think would be the best approach. What do you think, Satyam? So you can't always work things out. However, this gives you the best chance of working with the person to come to a mutually acceptable solution. Okay, next slide. And this just goes over what I just said. Be careful with the bridge. This is where we want to be careful that we don't validate and say, Satyam, I can see why you want to do X, Y, and Z, but then I didn't really mean that. So you want to do a positive bridge, either a pregnant pause or a positive connector such as and. And then I go into my opposing or slightly different view. It might just be slightly different than what Satyam said, which makes it a lot easier. Okay, how to make an apology. How many of you, how often do we have to make apologies during the day? I have to actually all day long. Okay. So an apology, the best way to make it is keep it short and simple and don't make excuses, okay? So let me show you a couple ways to do an apology. Okay, let's see, I guess I can walk down here because I've got a cordless thing. Okay, so you can let me know if... As a sound person, I should have known that never was going to work. Okay. I apologize for hurting your ears. Okay, so make it short and simple and don't make excuses. If you're a doctor and you're late for a patient, or if you're anybody who's late, just say, I apologize for being late. You have my full attention now, Haima. How can I help you? Just keep it simple. Just like that. Don't explain, I'm the doctor on call, and I just got to, blah, blah, blah. They don't want to hear that. They just want to know you're sorry because they want to know that I respect Jaime's opinion as a patient. Now, I'm going to tell you a secret what to do if you're in really hot water. This is what Swami actually did at the ashram. Phil Goslin told this story at a retreat several years ago. There's a lady in the ashram who was way past her visa, and the police were out looking for her, and they wanted to bring her into the office there. And so Swami knew about this, so he called her in for an interview briefly beforehand. Swami says, you are in big trouble. He says, they're going to bring you to the police station. They're going to be yelling and screaming at you, and I'm going to tell you what to do. He said, I want you to repeat 3 things, and just keep on repeating. No matter what they say, no matter what they do to you, just keep on repeating, okay? So this is what he told her. Say these 3 phrases. I'm sorry, my mistake, please forgive me. And just keep on repeating this. So she went to the police station, and sure enough, Swami was right. There was 3 or 4 police officers there yelling and screaming at her, doing all these things, and she kept on saying, I'm sorry, my mistake, please forgive me. I'm sorry, my mistake, please forgive me. This went on for a long time, and finally they just threw up their hands and they said, go. So that's what you should remember to do if you get into a really tough spot. Okay, next slide. Okay, now email is now this is something we're going to talk about briefly. By the way, how am I doing on time? 8 more minutes. Good. Perfect. So email is a good way to share information. However, it's a very bad way to resolve conflicts, and we shouldn't say anything in email. Next slide, please. If you remember anything about this lecture and someone asks, what did you learn about emailing techniques? These are the 2 things I'd like you to remember. Email is not a good way to resolve conflict, and we should not say anything negative in email. I have seen so many times in the Sai organization and at work, when there's differences of opinion and people try and resolve it by email, things just go south, things get worse. So whenever you see things differently than people, which is, it happens frequently, it's best to talk with them in person or call them up on the phone. Trying to resolve it by email is not a good way to do it. The other thing is don't say anything negative in emails. Why? Because that email could be sent all over the world, and sometimes is. And the worst thing that could happen is this, and this has happened many times before. Let's say I'm saying something negative about Hyman, and I'm sending it to a bunch of people, and then accidentally Hyman's in the email also. How embarrassing is that going to be? And that happens. So if there's something that you're thinking about negative that you need to talk with, and you need to talk with someone about it, just do it in person, not by email. And of course, the best thing to do is if I have anything negative about Hyman, who should I be calling? Hyman. Then talking behind Hyman's back. Okay, next slide. Now, the other thing is make the subject line well thought out. How many times have we gotten an email and you have no idea what that email is? And we all get multiple emails a day. Sometimes I even get an email that there's no subject line. So make the subject line well thought out and then have as few bullet points as possible. All of you know Mark Twain. One time Mark Twain sent a long letter to one of his friends, and his friend thought, is this really from Mark? It's just, it's so diffuse, I don't know what he's trying to say. And right at the end of the correspondence of the letter that he wrote, Mark Twain said, I'm sorry for this long letter. If I would have had more time, it would have been shorter and more to the point. So, the same thing with emails. It takes a longer period of time to write a good email, so let's take our time, especially when we're sending it out to many people that need to read it. Now, the other thing, and most regional presidents like Suzanne Slyman and Das are really good about this, have everything that's pertinent in there that you need to know. In other words, don't say, oh, refer to that email that I sent you, 3 weeks ago about how to register or, some other thing. Put everything in the email they need to know, the name, the date, the location, the link to register, whatever they need to. Make it easy for the person. Now, how about long email chains? Have you ever got one of those where there's a long email and they started talking about X? Now, a few days later or a week later, they're talking about Y or Z, and yet the subject line is still the same. So, good heavens, if the subject changes, change the subject line so people know what you're talking about rather than just keeping the same line and keeping the email chain going. Okay, next slide. So, not a good way to resolve conflict. Get on the phone if you have a difference with someone. Don't try and do it by email. Next slide. Don't put anything negative in an email. We already went over the reasons for that. Next slide. Don't share official Sai email lists. If you have a list of like 100 people in your region, the best thing to do is blind copy and make it really transparent that I'm sending this to all devotees in the region so people know, and then just blind copy so that not everyone gets the list. The reason for that is, unfortunately, a lot of people will accidentally or purposely use the same email list that you've said to send out business things that are not related to the Sai organization, or maybe their email is hacked into and they get the emails of all the Sai devotees. So be careful about sending things with other people's email address. And be careful about hitting reply all. I work for an organization that has over 1,000 people in it just locally, and so if someone hits reply all, you put spam in about 1,000 people's email. So be very careful about hitting the reply all. Next slide. Okay, so now we're coming down the home stretch. If love is the basis of our communication, basically we'll automatically be a better communicator. And I want to share something that Swami shared with the Pink twins, 2 lovely ladies, one of whom, Moya, I think is still alive, and from Australia. 2 of the most loving ladies in the world. One time Swami said, the amount of love that's in the heart of these 2 ladies is more than all the love and all the people that were filling the Kalwant Mandir. What greater compliment could Swami give for a devotee? Now, they both helped children and adults that are physically and mentally challenged. And many times they had difficult conversations. Swami said, no matter how difficult the situation is, if you just put enough love into it, everything's going to turn out as good as it can. If we just put enough love into it. Next slide. So we should act with love, do our best, and leave the outcome in Swami's hands. And one thing I'd like you to remember as we close this, loving communication is a sure path to happiness, which Swami says is union with God. And why is that? Next slide. Each one of us in this room, we have the opportunity to speak with Swami, to interact with Swami, and to have Swami's beautiful darshan with each and every person we meet throughout the day, all day long, if only we remember. I thank you all for your kind attention. Jai Sai Ram.